Hello, everyone, and welcome to Romania Power BI and Modern Excel User Group monthly meetup. Thank you all for joining the fourth meetup of this year, our 15th in total. We have the honor today to host one of the most knowledgeable and passionate Power Query speakers. Thank you, Alex, for accepting our invitation, and I'm really happy to have you on RoPod. Even if this is your first appearance at the Romania Power BI user group, I hope it's not the last one. So we'll have to take care about this. Uh, Community will learn a lot from your great experience, and we are always happy to have speakers like you. For our newest members, my name is Christian, and I will be your host today. Uh, The agenda is straightforward. After this short intro, we'll go through our next scheduled meetups. Then Alex will deliver his session. A short Q&A at the end, just before ROPAG monthly raffle with prizes from Enterprise DNA, which is our primary official sponsor. But more on this, I'll tell you a little bit later after presenting our next meetups. During the session, just some organizational stuff at the beginning. Please make sure your microphone is muted and your video is turned off during Alex's presentation. Please use the chat to type your comments or questions. In order to spot questions, please prefix them with a Q. And if you have some internet problems, feel free to drop off and join again. The Teams, it's recording everything. And speaking of recording, the note here is for myself mainly to make sure that I don't forget to start the recording, because after a while we'll post the recording on our user group. As you see on the screen, I messed up a little bit with the animation. The history was supposed to be the last one, but nevertheless, it's good to be here. Our next meetup will be on May 26th with Ed Hansberry. We are still debating whether we have a data modeling session or a Power Automate session. We'll adjust it until then. We have 1 month until then. And then our next meetup in June will be on the 30th of June with Pragati Jain, with storytelling, a session about storytelling with data. As I said, all the recordings, all our past recordings are on YouTube, and this is the short link to access them in case you are new or you want to rewatch it. This is the address this is the playlist where this session will be also uploaded. As I said, I have some more words about our primary official sponsor, Enterprise DNA. They are our sponsor since August last year, and on every live meetup, Enterprise DNA is offering 3 memberships, 3 full 1-year memberships on their platform for the members that are joining our live session. In order to get one of these memberships, please scan the QR code here, fill up the form, and mark your option to participate in the raffle. At the end, after the Q&A, we'll run the raffle. I'm still thinking whether to use the old Power BI report with Power Apps inside to randomize, or use the same wheel of names that we've used last meetup. We'll decide until the end. Don't worry if you haven't had the chance to scan the QR code. I will put the link in the chat a little bit later. And now let's come back to our session. As I said at the beginning, I don't think I know someone else more passionate and knowledgeable than Alex when it comes to Power Query. We've met through LinkedIn, I think, some years ago, as part of Power BI community, learning stuff and sharing different achievements on the learning path. And I think it was at the time you were not even working for Microsoft, right, Alex?
Probably. I mean, Charles typing in the chat here. I feel like we've all been on this learning journey together over multiple years. So
Yeah, exactly. Well, community, it's the place where we meet these kind of people, like-minded people, and it's always great to learn from each other. We've then met when Alex was doing the closing call for the 30-day query folding challenge 2 years ago. And eventually, last month, we've actually met in person, finally, in SQL Beats in London. It was so good to finally see you and talk to you. It was something special to see you and all the other guys from Microsoft. Alex is a senior program manager inside Power BI Cat team. Cat is not related to animal cats, but I will let him to say a few words about what the customer advisory team is doing in Microsoft. But as far as I know, Alex is also a cat lover, so it's a double double cat here. And Alex, as far as I know, is one of the biggest Power Query supporters. He's doing all kind of free sessions for the community, speaking of many user groups on all kind of topics in an hour. By the way, he's having a great GitHub repo. I'll provide the link during the session. And I was really happy when we finally met and he accepted our invitation. And I've learned a lot from Alex during the last years. I'm really glad that I have the opportunity to thank you, Alex, for everything you are doing for the community. It's a great honor to have you here, and please tell us a few words about you, and then the stage is yours.
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, thank you everyone for your time, attendance, and hanging out today. I'll just share, like, I've been on this journey the same as everyone else. I pick up the books, I probably put in some late nights or weekends, trying to keep up. Of course, all the feature releases with the blog, you just have to pace yourself after a while. But I'm no different than you. So hopefully today, as we kind of go through the journey, if you have any questions, please feel free. I am always extremely selfish. I'm that person in the back of the room. If I have a question and I think that it can solve one of my problems, I'm going to ask it, and I'm going to, try and get the answer as clear as possible. But that's just who I am, and I hope that you bring that same spirit today too. If you see something that you're like, oh my gosh, that one thing right there could solve this one challenge I've been dealing with, come off mute, ask the question. We're always here just hanging out together. There's no formal pause or wait for you to kind of respond, but throughout, I'll take over the screen share and I'll do a proper introduction of myself and the team. But once again, I'm just so appreciative, Christian and kind of the Romania group here for inviting me in today. So with that, let me go ahead and start screen sharing here. I'm going to start my presentation in my PowerPoint. And then let me do the screen share. Teams buttons. Cool. Awesome. So with that, thank you everyone for your time, for your attendance here today as we talk about Power Query custom functions and documentation. This is what I would traditionally call a deeper dive session. So we'll start out small, we'll kind of build until the very end, and hopefully at the very end you'll be like, this was a mind-bending experience. And then also with that, just because you don't get it today doesn't mean that these resources are lost in any way, shape, or form. Christian had talked about the Power BI Workshops repo. I try and take as many of my sessions and turn them into just self-paced follow along after the fact. So go as far as you can in your understanding. And if at a certain point you need to tap out, that's completely understandable. That's just where you can pick up kind of the next time you want to start learning these opportunities. So with that, my name is Alex Powers, program manager here on the Power BI customer advisory team. We work with a lot of our largest strategic customers who are trying to onboard and adopt Power BI, do things at scale. So of course, if you kind of see all the questions and the guy in the cube and Matthew Roche and everyone, they're always talking about the adoption, the journey of folks, how you can get more people into Power BI. It's through things like this, like the community evangelism, coming out to user groups, talking to you, seeing and learning the things that you're kind of struggling with, and then hopefully, taking a lot of that feedback back to our product engineering teams. I have my things that I would love to see improved, obviously on the Power Query side. So if you ever have a similar thing like, Alex, can we do this? Or if you're stuck, always feel free to tag me on Twitter, LinkedIn, just reach out. I'm always approachable in that way. My background, though, I'm not through kind of a traditional IT sense. I'm strictly an Excel user who attended kind of the dashboard in a day with Power BI. Eventually, I started to get my hands around that, and then onto Azure. I don't know what's after Azure. It just feels like the metaverse. We're going to be plugged into a machine somewhere. It's just cloud enlightenment kind of as we go. But personal interests, as we talked about, cats. I absolutely love our cats. Professional wrestling, and then, of course, data. Just so you know that I'm a real person, I do have some interest outside of Power BI. I was Time Magazine's Person of the Year in 2006. Then also, I absolutely love pineapple on pizza. I understand that is a divisive topic or comment there, but it's what I enjoy. Hopefully you're the same, or maybe you're giving me the thumbs down and puke emojis now. Started a dashboard in a day, now I'm here. Shoulder to shoulder with other people, having those light bulb moments. Oh my gosh, I think that this thing could solve so many of my problems and challenges here with my data, my reporting. I just dug in, attended the user groups, searched another article that maybe someone else tapped out on and they couldn't find a response. My journey is yours. It's you found this thing. Hopefully you attended one of the dashboard and days, or maybe even like the EDX course with kind of Will and Amanda. Just keep going. Find a community. That's what I would always encourage everyone. So with that, I want to start us off here with just our session objectives, kind of that with them. What's in it for me if I was to learn these things? We're going to do some live M demos, even more M demos. So M is the Power Query formula language. And then, of course, at the very end here, just that Q&A and wrap up. So what's in it for me? Why should I pay attention throughout this next hour and some odd here? Well, I just think that this is the coolest thing in the world. This Power BI data catalog, where I can have my queries. I've got the names, descriptions. I've got these sharing settings. I can share with everyone in the organization, kind of here with the enterprise, maybe specific people and groups of people. I can list my documentation. I can also have the first few rows of previews. So in this way, as people are looking to connect out to my Power Query queries, they have all this rich metadata like query certification status, searching, finding, maybe columns, things of that nature. Christian, this just sounds incredible. Are you using the Power BI data catalog today? Or is this maybe the first time you're hearing about it?
I heard about it, but it's never dug into it.
Never dug into it. All right. Well, let me maybe show the kind of the preview here. Just, I'm over in Excel. I can see my tables. In this example, that world historical and predicted. I've got a description of it. I can go out and view in the portal. I could copy that URL. I could go to that data source here. On this one, it's more of a HTML page. I've got my columns listed. This looks incredible, Christian. What are you thinking?
It's a little bit, actually, it's much better than what it was at the beginning when you could save your Excel queries somewhere in a central point and you could access them. It's much better than that, but the idea, it seems to me, similar.
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe you're catching on to my trickery here, but this awesome feature was deprecated.
Well,
no longer available. Oh, probably about 4 or 5 years ago, everyone was so excited about this, this data catalog, seeing your queries, seeing all the rich metadata. Unfortunately, I want to say 2017, 18, just deprecated. So you're like, Alex, why are you trying to trick us here now? I'm not.
So it's not there anymore. But,
yep. But you're excited because you see query certification status. You think about the endorsements. Obviously, descriptions are always helpful for finding things. So this is why I'm excited, is this upcoming personal query gallery. So if you go out to the Power BI, kind of the release plan report, they've got this listed as public preview in September of 2022. You'll have the availability to save your queries. So when we talk about, custom functions, documentation, what was I doing when I built out this query? What does this transformation step mean or do? Having that rich documentation out in your query gallery. So on this one, obviously, it's a personal query gallery, but I just have to cross my fingers and believe that at some point I'll be able to start sharing my queries. So having the ability to add, edit, remove queries, hopefully in the future, share them with other people, have that documentation included within that function, so then that way they can self-service as much as possible. So keep an eye out for this one. That's what I would kind of recommend for you.
Does it pop up automatically? Can it be made mandatory?
Oh, goodness. I mean, that would be incredible. I don't have much details on it, but I mean, as soon as we start hopefully seeing some previews, or maybe Miguel Lopez and them may do a presentation at kind of one of the Microsoft events. That if they do, that would be awesome. That'll be the first one in line. But this is why I'm so excited, is to have some place to store my queries. So with that, let's get into an actual demo here now. I'm going to jump out to kind of the GitHub repo. So we talked about here, after the PowerPoint, I just say anything that you need, hopefully you can self-service. So whether it be getting into DAX Studio, Tableau Editor, kind of paginated reports, I have all these out here for you. So in the Power Query custom functions in an hour repo, this will give you just everything that we're going to walk through together today. So if you're like, I got lost at this point, come back to the page, bookmark, star it, and then obviously you can go through navigation experiences like this just through GitHub. So Power Query custom functions and documentation. So we talked about the M language, which stands for mashup. So it is our data mashup language. So it is a functional, case-sensitive language, so especially if you're used to typing everything in lowercase or uppercase, thinking like the Excel formulas, unfortunately just not over here. So things you want to keep in mind is just at the very beginning of a new word, it's going to be that proper casing, so the capital letter and then down to the lower cases. As we continue to go through, you'll see more and more of this kind of formula and function, and it'll all start making sense for you, hopefully. One of the things I would recommend, though, just any kind of Power Query developer, just get out here and download the Visual Studio Code extension for the Power Query M language. So some of the benefits here are going to be the fuzzy autocomplete, where it can suggest keywords, the local variables hover to display some of the metadata information, maybe about the function, the identifier, functional hints for those arguments. What arguments do I need to satisfy with this function to have a successful return? And then my favorite here, code formatting. So traditionally, we look at Power Query in the advanced editor, and it's just this massive block of text, and you're like, why is everything smushed together? Come out here, leverage the code formatting. It just makes everything a lot more readable, kind of in the long term. But let me showcase that here. So out in Visual Studio Code, what you can do is you can go to extensions, and then you can search the marketplace, Power Query, if I can type. Awesome. So you'll see that it is in the official Microsoft release. So if you were to click on this, then you'll be able to do the install at the very top. Then it just goes over some of this information also in any release or updates here on the side. I'll ask a question, though, to the group. Is anyone here today using the Power Query M language extension in Visual Studio Code? Or is this the first time you're seeing it, hearing about it?
I do from time to time, but usually I'm using powerqueryformatter.com. So for me, it seems too much like Visual Studio, and I'm also an Excel guy. So Visual Studio, it's a bit scary for me. This is why the powerqueryformatter.com is working better for me. And it has more or less the same functionality. You can only format the code and have some time intelligence if you're writing from scratch. Right?
I agree. So there is no execution engine here today. If you were to look at the Power Query SDK extension for Visual Studio, you can run your M queries outside of any application. So outside of Excel, Power BI, etc. For today, though, this is purely just a code editor. That's it, unfortunately. I'll show you some reasons why I love it, and hopefully you'll be like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that it could do that. We'll kind of jump back and forth between the VS Code and then also kind of Power BI Desktop for today. Just keep in mind, everything that we do in Power BI is also transferable to Excel. You could take the same code up into the Power Query Online experience of data flows that could be in Power Apps, Power Automate, etc. But a lot of this is just the same code base transferable to all these different applications. Cool. Check out Power Query M language extension. Like I said, hopefully I can win you over here by the end, though. Power Query values. So there are two different types of values within Power Query, one being a primitive value and then another being structured values. So when I talk about primitive values, I'm talking about null. I'm talking about logical number, time, date, time zone, text, binary function. So if I think about the type within Power Query, I'm going to have the null.type, logical.type, int8.type, int 16, 32, 64, currency, decimal.type. Kind of that pattern that we were talking about, the capital letter, kind of that period, the next capital letter, time.type. If I was to look into this series, I've got 15, 05, 15. Time is hours, minutes, seconds. So in military time, that is 3 o'clock, or what, 3:05, 15 p.m. If I was to look at dates, year, month, day, 2022, 0630, date, time. So if I'm combining these now, it's year, month, day, hours, minutes, seconds. I'm not teaching you anything that you don't already know. I'm just telling you how to read it over in Power Query. Date, time zone. So we've got our year, month, date, hour, minute, second, and then we have our hour offset. So how many hours do I need to adjust? Maybe it's like a time zone that I need to adjust. Text, very simple here. Double quotes, hello, comma, world. We're going to see that a lot today. Binary, I'm not writing them as much, but there's an example. And then, of course, functions. So a function is a type. So bar is number, our return type. Let foo equals bar times 10 in foo. Just a nice little example there of a function. Come back to numbers. So is anyone classifying your number types correctly within Power Query today? Maybe using like an int8, if you only have values that go up to, 255 within that series. If it goes above that, it'll return an error of a data quality saying, I'm sorry, this number has exceeded my allowable boundary. 64 obviously being just such a huge range. Currency, limiting it to just, 4 decimal places, and then decimal type supporting all the way out to 15. Is anyone out there looking at the types currently of your primitive values? I'll pause there.
I'm checking on them when I'm trying to optimize the model and the storage in a model. I will never keep the decimal type for numbers that are integers, for example.
I agree. And we'll point to that resource here in a moment for those who maybe it's your first time hearing about some of these different types of the number. But right there with you, Christian, for optimization within Power BI, it's just a great asset. So Ron asks, kind of looking within which context. So I'll click out here real quick. So data types in Power Query. This article is included within this resource here. So when we talk about decimal numbers versus like a fixed decimal number of currency, so a currency allows, and let me go ahead and zoom in here, it allows up to storage of 4 digits to its right. So if you're bringing in, let's say, dollars and cents into your Power BI data sets, are you doing it as a currency value or as a decimal? Because there's a much larger storage implication if you're to do it as a decimal number, which supports, 15 digits long. So that just takes up way more storage in your data set, bloats things potentially. It's something to keep in mind. And then Christian, if we have questions here throughout the chat, just please let me know. I'm seeing some great ones here from Sandeep.
Yeah, there is one from Sandeep. Is int8, 1632 are facets and don't necessarily reduce the byte size or save column size?
That is correct. So at least within analysis services, all it has is the concept of an int64. How I would approach it over here is just that allowable range within Power Query. So if you had, let's say, 8 different colors, do I need to have int64 within Power Query? Probably not. But if I exceeded that 255 allowable range, then it will throw an error within Power Query saying that this data has exceeded the allowable boundaries. I don't know that I would position it that much if you're more of like the GUI fan, but if you were looking for those data quality checks and controls, that's where I would probably leverage the 8 and 16s, 32s, etc. But from a size point of view, it does not make a difference. And that answers the question.
There was another 2 comments also from Sandeep and Christy Prifty. When you show the VS Code, we really need a tabular editor for Power Query. So maybe now that Miguel is also in the team and you have closer contact, maybe we can have something from the team and not an external tool.
I agree. I would love to see that as a kind of the standalone. All right, so we've got primitive values. You know, we know what a number is, we know what text is, we know what dates are. Structured values. So when we're out in Power Query, we've got our structured values, which are a list, which is the curly braces. In this example, I'm storing a number, I'm storing text, I'm also storing a date. So I can store multiple different values. Within a record, so my record.type, I've got an A, which is my key value pair. So A equals 10, B equals a list, which our list of values is 1, 2, and 3. And then of course, C equals pizza. So just containing a string there. At the very end, table.type, so that's hash table. The first kind of list of values here is going to be my column names. So I've got an animal column and I've got a count column. Then I've got my list of list here. So I've got my first row being cat 99, second row being dog 1, third row being bear 3. So if I was to maybe take this, kind of copy and paste it over into Power Query, just do a new query, and I'll make this a little bit bigger here in just one moment. Paste that. Awesome. Just like that, you know, first item for my column headers, animal, second count, my list of lists, cat, dog, bear. And then let me take this over into just kind of VS Code here, if you don't mind. So I'll do this real quick. And let's make it look a little pretty. Source equals, just so it doesn't throw me an error, source. And then I'm going to change this from a plain type into a Power Query formula. Zoom out here just a little bit. Cool. I'm going to format this document now. Let source equals table. My first list of lists is animal counts. My list of list values here for each row, cat 99, dog 1, bear 3, a lot more readable as opposed to that big flat line of stuff. If I was to hover above source, my let variable, my source data type here is classified as any. So we'll start talking about classifying our data types now, because this should be a table as opposed to an any. Let's jump back out to our document. Before I move on, primitive values, structured values, are these new terms for you? Have you kind of been using these? Do you, when you say them to your end users, like, what are you talking about? What are these strange words? Because we're going to be introducing more and more strange things I just don't hear enough people talking about. You know, I hear over the DAX, context transitions, what is context filtering. I never hear it on the Power Query side. New terms, awesome. Sweet, cool. Well, then let's start out here with custom functions. So a single output value. Function is written first with the naming of the function parameters, then providing an expression to compute the result of the function. So anything within Power Query is computed. So in Power BI Desktop, if you were to add a new column within DAX, that is a calculated column. If you were to add a new table within Power Query, that is a new computed table or a new computed column. So everything in Power Query is computed. The first item here we're going to talk about within custom functions is our goes to symbol. So I've got an empty parameters here. I'm not asking for anything. I have this goes to, so this equals, and then the greater than sign, and then I've got hello world. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this. Now jump over into our Power BI desktop. I'll do a new query. We're going to have a lot of these today. I'll do equals, just so I can get my formula. Enter parameters. I've got my invoke button. Anytime that I press this button, what is the text that's going to be returned? I'll pause here. What is this text that will be returned if I press that invoke button?
Should be hello world.
Hello world. Awesome. Hello world. I press it again. Hello world. Press it again. Hello world. There we go. All right, cool. What is the data type that's being returned?
Text. Right?
What is it?
Text.
Text?
Or is it any because you haven't specified?
Yeah.
Look at that right there. My return value is going to be any. Interesting. All right, let me jump back out here. So this is an implicit return value. So implicit means I've not specified it. I'll let Power Query kind of determine it here for me. So in this example, it's just taking the any, it's saying, all right, I'll determine what it is, and it's a text output. What if I'm expecting text only? I mean, I wouldn't throw an error if that was to be the case. So I have an explicit return value. So as text. So let's try this then. So here, we're going to do a new blank query. The only difference is I'm going to go ahead and specify my return type. So we said as text. At the very bottom, I've now classified as text. I press invoke, hello world, press invoke, hello world. Nothing really different, but the expectation is accurate. Let's go ahead and check this one out then. So I've got my required parameters, hello, and then my full name. So I'm going to now start passing in values. And then the passed in value that I'm expecting is going to be text. It's going to do copied. Go ahead and jump back over to our desktop here. We're going to keep deleting stuff, building it, destroying it as we go. A few more of these and delete them. New query, blank query. And my equal sign at the beginning. Awesome. What is the return type of this function?
It's obvious now.
What is it? What are you thinking, Greg? George?
It's any, because you
Any?
didn't specify the output. You only specified the input for it.
Awesome. You're right. So if I type in that my first name is, or my full name is 10, hello 10, I can type in 20, hello 20, you know, it's casting, it's doing things, but really it should be text. So as text. So if I was to do this here, hello 10, hello 20, it's casting still. If I change this to, let's do a number. I wanted to throw some errors. There we go. So unfortunately, it doesn't cast anymore, right? The thing, we cannot convert the value of 10 to type number. In this example, it's throwing those errors that I want to see. It's not my expected inputs, and then obviously where I would like to be in terms of those outputs. So implicit returns, explicit returns, required parameters, and of course my optional parameters, things that may be I don't need a response for. If you don't say your name, I'm still going to be courteous. I'm still going to say hello. So if we were to paste this into kind of our Power Query window here now, new blank query. And let me go ahead and scale this out just a little bit. Oh, there we go. So prefix here to my parameter, it's going to be optional. I've got my name here, and then my return or my expected input is going to be text. And then from there, I can start doing logic. So if it's null, then return a hello. If not, then go ahead and return their full name. What is my return type here for this function? What's the return type?
You specified it as text, right?
Oh, that's for my parameter. But what's my return? Is this an implicit return or is this an explicit? Any? We've got an any in the chat. That's
Implicit.
Yeah, so this is an implicit value returned as an any.
Mm-hmm.
Really, I want to say explicitly, hey, bring me back text, as text. So my full name is going to be Alex Powers, press invoke. Hello, Alex Powers. If I don't include it here because it's optional, we've got that listing, just press it, hello. All right, so implicit returns, explicit returns, optional parameters. We're starting to just build kind of here as we go. My let expressions, because we've just been doing single line responses, just bring me back, a primitive value of a text string. Here, of course, we're going to have additional and more steps. Some of this example, we saw some of these hash marks. What does this stuff mean? it is a step identifier. So every step within your let expression, obviously it's storing a value. So in this example, let me go ahead and copy this. I'm going to paste this over here if you don't mind. I'm going to format it real quick. Cool. So I've got my parameters here at the very top, and let me close some of this stuff so we can make it bigger. So repeated as number, optional first name as text. So between repeated and first name, is repeated required or is it optional? So for my parameters here at the very top, is repeated required or is it optional?
It's required.
Required, you're right. So for your parameters, all of the required will have to be on the left-hand side here within your list. So if I had, another one here that I wanted to include, all of my optional would have to be at the end. So kind of keep that in mind. All optional have to be at the end. So in this example, if I was to hover above greetings, I can see that greeting, the return value here, what is greeting going to return? If I hover above this value in VS Code, text, and return text. Scroll down here to yelling. I can see that it's going to return nullable text. So if nothing was submitted, of course, it can return a null value. It'd still be fine. And then why are we yelling so much here at the very end? If I hover above this at the very end of my variable, so this step identifier of where I'm storing my values, I can see that the return type is that of a list. I'm using that list.repeat. I hover above this. Let me scroll back here. It shows me my parameters here for this function. So a list that I need to pass through, and then the count, so the number of times that I'd like to repeat it, and then the expected return type at the very end is going to be a list. Text.upper, if I hover above this, I can insert noble text. I can insert the culture, so the optional noble text, so en.us, es.mx, maybe for my Spanish friends. And then the return type at the very end is a nullable text. Hovering above the different functions here within VS Code, just one of these big benefits that I'm like, oh my gosh, I've seen the code formatting, but I can also see the required parameters here. As I hover above, I have some IntelliSense just the same. So if I was to do this again, text.upper. Of course, when I hit tab, it actually works. So there you go. And then greetings. Awesome. So all of this works. So let me go ahead and do this here. Jumping back out into Power Query, we're going to keep destroying them, get rid of them. New query, blank query. I'm going to jump into our advanced editor, paste this here real quick. Beautifully formatted code, I agree. And then what I miss here, greetings, what should it be? Greeting, yep. Cool. Here at the top, repeated is a required value. First name is optional. I can see that it is a 1, 2, 3. So I'm expecting a number, first name being text. Here at the very end, my function return type is currently that of a any. So I'll just let Power Query determine what it should be. So how many times would I like to have this repeated? Well, of course, 10 times. My first name is going to be Alex. Press invoke. I return a list here with my name repeated 10 times. And of course, just yelling with this uppercase at the very end. Query here again, optional. So this time, maybe I don't want to have it included. So I'll just say return this 20 times, press invoke. Hey, 20 different times. Returned as a list.
There is a question from Ron. Why is yelling a list?
Yeah, let's go back.
Yeah, why is yelling a list here in the end? It's text.upper list.repeat.
Yep. So in this example, I need to pass through first a list. So my first requirement is going to be, it has to be a list that can be repeated. So I store my text value inside of a list, and then I say, go ahead and use this list value and just repeat it 10 different times. So now at the very end, if I was to jump back into Power Query, it takes that first row and it repeats that for the specified number of times. So here in this example, we did 20. If we were to change it, obviously, to 5, that is why the text is stored within a list. And then line above yelling, to kind of jump back up here, text.upper, and then the line above would be greeting. It's just our first, what do we want to store from that text value. All this code is available if you want to dig through it, kind of get your hands on it.
And Gina posted the link to your GitHub.
Awesome. Do some more. So of course, commenting, at the very least, you know, it doesn't have to be the full-blown documentation, but start commenting some of your queries here. So to get started, if you're a keyboard shortcut fan, Control / or the double whack here for single line comments. I'll copy this. I'll paste this over into just Power Query, one more blank query. Cool. Right-hand side, current date time. If I was to hover above, I see these little eye indicators. This step stores the current system date time. This step extracts the date part. This step extracts the year part. So I've got multiple different comments here based upon my query. My advice just here is keep the comments above your current line. I'll show you here at the very beginning. If I was to place this at the end, and then if I press done, you'll notice that that comment goes away. So store all of your comments here at the very top. If you enjoy writing books within Power Query, multi-line parts, there is kind of a, you know, if you're a SQL developer, the / for the beginning and then the * at the very end, or the keyboard shortcut Alt-Shift-A. So I'll copy this, paste this over into Power Query again. This example, press done. Get a multi-line, but unfortunately, at least on the applied steps, it will still be just kind of a single line readout. When you go into your advanced editor, though, you'll see here, you can do the multi-line just with that /*. So if you're familiar with SQL, very similar experience here. And then the keyboard shortcut is Alt-Shift-A. That will turn it on and off. Oh.
I think the / also works, right?
/ works for a single line, but if you wanted to, you could highlight all of them and do Control-Shift, and it will do the doubles for you. It's really up to preference, but I'll ask here, how many people are doing either single line or multi-line comments today within your Power Query queries? At least documenting it for yourself next time you get back into it.
I'm doing it only for development purposes, unfortunately, and only single lines for documentation. I'm looking forward to learn how to do it today properly.
Awesome. So we do have some people doing it. And then obviously some people, it sounds like it was just a mandatory requirement and coming up through school. So they've got that muscle, which is awesome. I want to start building upon this concept of documentation, and then also for my end users, like how can I leverage some of these capabilities for my, folks on the other side here with after this Power Query gallery, and I start giving them all this information. We're going to start out with Hello World again. I'm going to continue on with the record, and then we're going to start replacing some of our metadata of this function. Let me copy this, jump out into our window. Cool. I'll also paste this over here. So we've got our function, hello world, implicit return type. I'm not specifying it. I've got my FX documentation, which is going to be a record, which is storing this required value pair. So this documentation.name. And I'm going to use the value.replace type function of Power Query. And I'm going to start replacing some of the metadata of this function. You're like, Alex, I have no idea where you're going. Just copy and paste the code and let's figure it out together. All right, cool. My function here is that hello world. Whenever I press it, I've got my goes to symbol. It's going to invoke that. I'm going to specify the name of this function, which is going to be my first line of code. And then I'm going to start doing some replacements down here. So I'm just going to press done. I'll expand this out. So my documentation.name is my first line of code. I can see that here within my Power Query. Or if you recall earlier when we were doing this, hello world, I'll do a blank query. Just edit parameters. Nothing too helpful for my end users. Didn't really tell them what it was doing or what the expectations of the return or samples are. It's not very helpful. So this is where I'm now starting to present information to others. I've got my documentation.name. Viewing metadata. So how do I see this metadata about these functions? Well, SQL.database, it's one that we all may use today in our own world, or maybe it's in Excel. What you can do is you can use this value.metadata and the value.type. So let's start here. Come on, don't freeze up. There we go. New query, blank query. So equals value.type of the SQL.database function. There we go. So I can see here SQL.database, the primitive value is that of a function, which is right. If I was to remove this here real quick, SQL.database, I have all this rich metadata about this function. So I've got my server, I've got my database, I've got queries, I've got all these things. I've got my function here. I've got the return, expected return at the very end. It's expected to return a table. So my value.type of this function is a function. Makes sense. So let's just do value.metadata about this function. So I want to understand all of this rich information that's being stored within this function. I've got my function.name, or I'm sorry, my documentation.name. I've got my documentation.long description. I would focus on this one. Documentation.category. Any examples that should also be sourced to that end user. So once again, if I was to jump back out here, SQL.database. If you want to find information about your functions, just don't include the parameters at the very end. You can just press enter and we'll return all this for you. So I've got my name, SQL.database, right there. I've got my long description, returns a table of SQL views, returns a table of SQL views. Awesome. Category, which if I was to go into my functions, I could see that category. And then my examples here at the very bottom. So if I scroll down here, don't see any examples. So don't have to worry about on this one. But if you want to see the documentation for the functions, just type in the name. If you want to see some of this metadata that's classified within it, just value.metadata. All right, so let's build upon this then. Documentation.name, documentation long description, documentation examples. Hello world. I'm going to store some of these values within this record set now. So my .name, my .description here, or long description, and then some different examples. So I'm going to say the text hello world, the code of it, so description code result, and then another sample here, even more of the text hello world because you've been hearing it endlessly. Press copied. Go here, press new query. It's done. Let's keep building. So implicit return value, we've got an any. The documentation.name is my first line of code right here. My description, the function will return the text hello world. Some of my examples, which I'm storing in a list, which would then for each item has to be in a record set. So my key value pair is description code result. First item within my sample here is the text hello world. The text hello world usage is going to be hello comma world. Output hello comma world. And then my second example here, even more of the text hello world, description code result, description code result. Copy this. We've seen the top. I need to talk about the bottom. So my value.type, fx hello world. That's my function here. Oh, let me remove this. Awesome. So my function here is hello world. If I press it, hello world, I would like to replace the metadata of that function. So value.replace metadata, because we saw the value.metadata, but now I want to update and replace it with this documentation. So FX documentation, which is my record set here, which includes my name, descriptions, examples, and then all these different examples here. Very end, just that replace the type of it. So replacing the existing hello world, which is just simply a hello world, not much more, no meta underneath it. I replaced that here with the updated. This is the deep end. Like we've been building the hello world to these stages here. So our functions, replacing metadata, replacing the underlying types there within. Keep going. Parameter documentation. So we've been talking about at least providing information of what this function does. How do I ensure that people know what the expected inputs are into my function, what they should type, what they should include, what they should not include? I'm thinking of like servers. Here's our dev, here's our test, here's our prod. I don't need to send you an email saying, here's the string. If I can build that into my list. Like what if they just saw a dropdown within my function and they just clicked it and they can now move on to where they should be? So including those sample values or the allowed values here within my function. This is the big one. So I'm going to move this to another screen, and we're just going to kind of build this as we go because there's going to be a lot of freehand. New query, blank query. Get out of here. Source equals. Actually, I can just do it here. Pizza function. I'll make this bigger in just one moment. We're gonna build it from the ground up, paste it back over into here, format it real quick. Awesome. Hopefully I'm winning you over on the Power Query VS Code extension. Just hovering above things is so awesome. So I've got a pizza function. I've got my parameters. So text, explicit return value is gonna be text. All I'm doing is combining text.combine. The best pizza in the world we obviously know is pineapple and something else. Press done. First topping, second topping. Pineapple. I'll pay you. Cool. And you're already saying, Alex, I'm not inviting you over to any of my pizza parties if this is what you expect. I'm going to be very explicit about what we do or don't allow. That would be awesome. So how could we do that? So I've got my initial function here. I have to remember, so my pizza documentation, make this bigger here for us. I also may move this into VS Code. We'll see here in a moment. Pizza type, just so I don't lose anyone here. So my type is going to be a function because I have an existing function right now, which is my pizza function. My first option here is my first toppings. And then my as, the type of text, and then the metadata here about this function. So first topping as text, first topping as type text, the metadata about this parameter. So let's go ahead and classify this here. Documentation dot field caption equals first topping of choice. Documentation dot field description. We'll choose the first topping from the list. And of course, my documentation at allowed values. It's going to be a list of values. So I'm going to say, well, of course, pepperoni, maybe some sausage, and then you can't keep me out of here. So there's definitely going to be some pineapple. Cool. So those are the allowed values that I'm going to allow for this first parameter. The formatting, multi-line, probably not. I'm going to say false. And then formatting, do I have any is code? I'll just go ahead and say true. So if I need to code format. Awesome. That's my first. I've got two arguments here now, right? So I've got my second topping. So I was going to paste this here because I recall this. Second topping as type text, right? So it's a type of text. The meta that I need to replace here is once again going to be all of this information. So let me just copy it. Let me just copy it. Cool. Type. Choose the second topping from the list. Second topping choice. There we go. Documentation field caption, second topping, second topping. We're going to do olives. We're going to do mushrooms. If I can spell it correctly. Then here at the very end, we're going to do jalapeno. Very similar here. And then this text. So let me go and close some of the stuff out. And where am I exceeding? Oh, get rid of that. Cool. Just taking a quick look here, just making sure I've got everything. So my value, I close. Awesome. And now I switch this up here just one moment. So I got it correct. Cool. I've got all of this, press done. You're like, Alex, I'm not seeing what you're seeing. All right, so let me jump back into the advanced editor. I have a type function here, which is my pizza function. And then I have another type function, which is all this rich metadata. So here at the very bottom, I've got my pizza function, which is being returned. But what I need to do is I need to replace the metadata of the current function here. So let me do a value dot replace type. So my current type is the type function, and I need to replace this with my pizza type. So pizza type here at the very bottom. So I'm replacing all the type information here with all of this rich information here. That's done. First topping of choice. I now have a drop down. If I hover above, choose the first topping of your pizza. I can give people descriptors. Second topping of choice. I now have an information. I now have a drop down. So if I select the drop down, pepperoni, sausage, pineapple, I give my end users, choose the dev test prod server, choose this variable, choose this item, this very explicit thing that I've now given you from my allowed values. I've included that here within my dropdown. So of course it has to be pineapple. Second topping choice, once again, olive, mushroom, jalapeno. Just go ahead and do jalapeno because it's incredible. Press invoke. Best pizza in the world is pineapple and jalapeno. I explicitly allowed certain values, and other values I said, I'm sorry, just you can't do it. It's not happening. Which is kind of a lie, because here at the very top, these are just simple text strings. So if I wanted to, I could come up here and I could change this value to pepperoni, and it is able to go ahead and invoke that and compute that. So keep in mind, if you start going down this road here in terms of documentation and allowed values, let me go back. Which one here? Query 7. This is purely for the front-facing interface, but they can still go through the formula editor and change things. So don't think of it like a security feature and implementation. It's just something that helps them through. Similar here, if I was to do like sample values, let's do that. Let's do is multi-line equals true. I can make a massive multi-line box here. I can customize any of this stuff that I want. If I wanted to include code samples within my descriptions, I can do all those things too. Anything that you need to do. in terms of your documentation, how you can help end users. All it is customizable here just by digging into the metadata about your functions and then start leveraging some of these things like the, jump back to this window, like the documentation, field captions, descriptions, sample values. All of this information is available to you.
There's a
post
question
here.
from Gina. Is there anything we are seeing here that does not apply to Dataflow's Power Query Online?
So there are like certain things within documentation that just for whatever reason aren't displayed today, but I would say that that is more of a momentary blip than it is like a long-term reasoning. You should expect to start seeing those things light up soon though, just as they continue to bring more parity between what existed within desktop and online. You can include sample values and field captions and things of that nature. Go ahead, Christian.
There's another question from Imran. How come in your drop-down list in allowed values, you don't get the default blank item as the first selection?
Which one was that? So I see here within allowed values. We're to kind of jump back over here. Let's do new query, blank query, drop it in. So first topping choice, I haven't selected anything.
Yeah, how come it's not a blank option first? As the first
Out of this
selection?
list?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have any blanks up here, do I? Pepperoni, sausage, pineapple. Are you thinking if I was to add a blank, maybe that's what you would want to see? So just to add it, kind of another blank here to my list.
I'm not sure. Imran, could you unmute and detail, please?
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you for the question. What it is, I do exactly the same as you, and I've got my 3 explicit allowed values.
Yep.
But when I click on the drop-down selector, the first item's still a blank one. And I was reading, it was a question that came up elsewhere, and apparently it's just the nature of, from what I understand, it's the nature of the drop-down menu selector. But on yours, it's perfectly clean. You get 3 values. There's no blank value that appears in your drop-down. Whereas in mine, the first one is a blank value, and then you get your 2 or 3 items. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, we're not seeing the repeated behavior here, so I mean, let me know if it's consistent.
It's a minor thing, but I've been wrestling with the metadata in parameters for the last 3 days, so I've just become a bit obsessed with it. But that's perfectly fine. Thank you.
Thanks, Imran. Awesome. Well, we've made it to the end of the page here. Hopefully, you've seen something where you're like, oh my gosh, this is just way into the deep end. And maybe that's where you start. Tomorrow is where you left off. So if you got to the point of comments and kind of multi-line, that's awesome. Just start using that as a simple way to get into documentation. Getting into kind of the more richer experiences here. Just go down here, a very simple example here with Hello World, just giving it a name and kind of replacing some of this metadata. And then all of this, I also try to include the links back to kind of the documentation. So in this way, you don't have to build a curriculum around finding 20 different pages. Do this thing. If you want to learn more, click on this link. This will take you out to the value.metadata and what it does. Very similar here with the documentation. This will take you out to an awesome page here, which is from the custom connectors. And this is what I'm building towards with all the things that I'm doing out in the community. If you're into the function documentation, if you make it this far, if you start enriching your queries with this information, you're not that far off from building your own custom connector. A few more clicks and you're there. I would love to see more people kind of developing custom connectors. All of this that we just talked about, documentation, examples, descriptions, names, allowed values, sample values, all of this is out here. Awesome descriptions once again. But hopefully, as you continue to follow myself, Christian, or anyone else out in the community, you'll start seeing some of the future sessions that I want to build towards, which are going to be getting started with custom connectors. So if that topic is something of interest for you, let me know. This is just planting the seeds to how we can get there, though. Whew.
I was trying to do a custom connector a few years ago to get my Strava data. And I saw some samples. It worked up until a point, but then everything ended up when I got my first connector and then finished.
Oh, goodness.
No additional one because there were no more samples.
Well,
It was
we're
deep
we'll
for
build
me.
them now together.
At the time, it was too deep for me.
Well, here's where you can start. Just simple documentation, and then we can kind of figure out the rest kind of together as a community. Multi-line examples, things that we just did here. Once again, just come out here. Hopefully you enjoyed the GitHub repo. Always available here in terms of self-service. And then if there's any areas for improvement, just let me know. I'm always happy to update this. It's rather quick with VS Code. Christian, I'm going to pass the stage back to you, though, unless we have any additional questions.
Well, it's nothing that we haven't covered. Maybe if anyone has some question now, feel free to unmute, raise your hand, and then we can unmute organized and ask the questions. Yeah, Pedro, that's the first question. Please go
Hi,
ahead.
Alex.
Go on, Pedro.
Okay. I have a question, not regarding any of this documentation thing, but Power Query. How do I? Is it possible to get daylight savings out of UTC time?
You're just thinking like a custom function.
Yeah. Is there any function if I have if I know I have a date and time based on UTC? I would like to know if it's on the
Daylight saving time.
it's time of the year or not.
Yeah, and I'm seeing other people here kind of chiming in too. I would imagine Ken Pulls maybe has like a function that he's developed. I've not personally tested some of the custom functions that the community has come up with. Sandeep here is also saying maybe a web API that you could call and maybe passing in as like one of the options here in terms of like adjusting. Because you could do like duration is another item here that you could offset it with. But I don't have anything off the top of my head.
Okay, thanks.
But yeah.
There's another question from Ron, which is off topic. How much parity between Power Query and Power BI and Excel? The documentation in Excel lists connections to about 40 plus sources. PBI documentation lists 150 plus sources.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of that in terms of like connectors, obviously there's a discrepancy there about which vendors which want which things and which tools. So maybe they only want certain connectors in Power BI and they don't want them in Excel. I mean, that would be my only thing. But if I was to look at simpler things like a text.upper, a date.year, in terms of like some of the actual core functions that affect your values, like all of those should be in parity. But if it's purely up to like a connector by connector example, yeah, there may be some discrepancies there.
I think a good point would be also to share the shared function and the sections function.
Yeah.
While we are here, because I'm not sure everybody knows about it.
Awesome. So let's do shared lowercase equals hash shared. It's going to give you the complete function library here, and you can see a lot of my functions on the left-hand side are also showing up. But everything that we talked about, so let me do into table in terms of data types. So my table dot, here are all my transformations that can affect a table structured value. If I was to do something similar, let's say text dot, here are all of my transformations that can affect a text data type. So how you should approach functions within Power Query, left-hand side is your data type, right-hand side is your transformation. So text dot after delimiter, text dot at, text dot from. If I was to do the same with dates, date dot is in previous. These are all of my date data types. And then here are all of my transformations. Similar for list, table, record. The list just goes on and on, but that's how you can start learning them.
If you click the white space near function, you see the entire documentation.
You got it.
So you have the documentation with you every time in Excel or Power BI.
Yeah, and you don't always have to come out to shared. If you recall the function off the top of your head, it's like in this example, table.last. Out in the formula bar, you can just do table.last, not type in any open parenthesis, close parenthesis, just ignore those. Just type that in, press enter, and it will return that function documentation for you just the same. Love shared though. It's such a cool function.
Yeah, and can you say anything about sections, which is included in shared?
So sections will give you a list of all the current kind of queries within your, at least here within the data set. So record, I've got my query one, which is a function record here in this one. All of this information you can go through, kind of self-document all of your queries that within your data set. So sections is very cool. You can also do some things like table profiling on top of this if you're looking at like data quality stuff. But this is one, at least sections where it doesn't work kind of up in the Power Query online experience. I'm not sure why today, but that's something I always kind of look out for just in the future. Awesome. What else?
Nothing in the chat. If anyone has any other question, this is the time before doing the raffle. And speaking of the raffle, you still have a few more minutes until we finish.
Adriel, what's going on? I see a hand raised.
I remembered another thing I would like to know. If you want to find, if you have lots of queries, and you want to find one of them, is there any way to, for example, if you were trying to find query 6, you have 12 queries.
Let me do one thing out here. So if you have been to some of my data flow sessions, I'm just a huge fan of the Power Query online experience. So let me go into this one here, hopefully. What you'll start seeing, hopefully, Christian, coming soon, ... at some point in the future, is the rich experience of Power Query online brought into the desktop application experiences. So something you just talked about, maybe you've got a lot of queries. They do now have a Power Query search bar at the very top where I can type in thing like my people table. Obviously I can navigate to it from there. The global search bar for Power Query does exist up here in Power Query Online, just not currently today for the local application experience.
Okay,
but that's
so
where I'm like,
So there's no option. You just have to.
Yeah, today, at least in the local experiences, yeah, it's kind of the manual hunt and find.
Okay, thanks.
Imran, hand up.
Thank you. Forgive me if this point has been raised already. The question is, you know how you've got parameter metadata, but you've also got the metadata for the function as a whole. But you can't have the two simultaneously. You can only have one or the other. Do you know if that is a forever thing, or is that gonna, or are we going to be able to overcome that obstacle?
Your question is kind of around having to have both of these kind of defined as opposed to just having them done once.
You can define the function like the field caption, for example, and the field description. So when you click on the next to the drop down parameter, you've got the little eye icon and you can see that information there. But then you've got the additional metadata for the function that sits below that, the usage and the example. I've tried to figure it out, but I don't know if there's a way you can have either one or the other, but not both at the same time.
Yeah, and I wasn't able to come up with a way around it either, kind of during my testing. I'm not aware of any massive changes to the underlying kind of Power Query formula language at the moment, though.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you again. Love the session and thank you very much.
Problem. Thanks for attending. Christian, I know you have to do a round here for the Enterprise DNA, so whenever you're ready, feel free to kick me off.
Yeah, I I think we can start because we already have 11 participants in the raffle. Let me share my screen. It should be visible now. This is a Power BI report, which is based on a SharePoint list, which is filled with Power Automate from the form that you were filling. Normally, our first meetups until last month, we were running these Power Apps inside Power BI to pick the winners. But last month, we tried something else, and I would like to try it again. Wheel of names. Let me do it a full screen and paste the participants. Let me do a last refresh. Paste the participants here. Screen. It's not showing correctly, but it should be okay. Anyway, let's shuffle the names. We have 11 entries, so let's go. Tap to spin to pick the first winner. Jay Decker from the Netherlands. It's our first winner. Congratulations. Let's spin it again with the remaining participants. Yuvi from Denmark. Congrats, you're the second winner. And now the last one. Sandeep, congrats. You're the third winner. I will send an email probably tonight to confirm your email addresses, and depending on how fast can you reply, we can set up the enterprise DNA entry, the membership. Thank you all for joining. Thank you, Alex, for coming and presenting to us. The session was just wow.
Thank you for inviting me, my friend.
I will have to watch it again, to be honest. Even if I saw it before to a different user group, it was great that you could do it here, but in order to fully grasp it, you have to go deep inside and try it and try to adapt to your own code. And anyway, it was great. Thank you for coming and accepting our invitation, and looking forward to have you again sometime in the future.
Thanks, Christian.
Thank you all for joining, and this is where the recording ends. Feel free to stay a bit more for some free chat without the recording, and see you all in next month.